Welcome back, warrior students, to my newest video. Today we are going to talk about Demo Shout and Thunderclap, because I read a lot of questions about those two abilities, like for example who should use them and how you want to build them into your rotation. And this is what we are trying to find out today. And first we are going to talk about both of those abilities briefly, and then we are going to take a look at a clip of me trying to keep up Thunderclap and Demo Shout on a dual wield build and on a two-handed slam spec build. So first of all, let's look at Demo Shout. Demo Shout reduces the enemy melee attack power by X amount, and this means that they will deal less damage with their physical auto attacks or with the auto attacks that scale on attack power, and they will deal less damage with some of the abilities like whirlwind abilities, cleave abilities. Those can sometimes deal less damage as well if Demoralizing Shout is on the target. Now Demoralizing Shout has one more mechanic that you maybe want to know about, and this is if you buff the boss, or if the boss gets buffed through an enrage or through maybe Curse of Recklessness or anything like this, Demoralizing Shout will provide a larger percentage based damage reduction to the boss, so maybe you want to be aware of this. Then next we have Thunderclap, and Thunderclap slows the enemy attack speed by 20%. In the tooltip it says the time between their attacks by 20% gets basically increased, and this tooltip, like this phrasing, time between attacks, is a little bit more accurate actually, because if you slow the attack speed of an AI, you effectively slow their abilities sometimes as well, because the AI acts under the same conditions like you would. For example, a firebolt cast for an AI will cancel their string timer. So what the AI tries to do a lot of the time is they try to do an auto attack immediately into a firebolt, like you would do with your slam or with like a chain lightning. If you want to weave that in as an enhancement shaman, then you want to do it after your auto attack, and this is the same thing that the AI tries to do as well. And not only this, even if they have like an instant whirlwind ability or something like this, they try to do the same here. They try to do like an auto attack into a whirlwind. And some of the mobs, especially some of the melee mobs, they have abilities like Heroic Strike or Cleave, where the next auto attack will actually be transformed into maybe a Cleave or a Heroic Strike. And if you have a Thunderclap on them, then obviously this diminishes the amount of cleaves or heroic strikes or whatever they want to do as well, and it as well lowers the burst potential of mobs by basically 20%, because if a mob wants to do like an auto attack into a cleave into an auto attack, then this will take basically a longer time to perform, and therefore you have more time to heal against this little bit of a burst combo from the AI. So this is like a mechanic that not everyone is aware of, but it's definitely pretty interesting, right? Alright, but now let's talk about who should be casting those abilities. Now if you have a warrior tank, then you can give him, like you can cast the first Demo Shout and the first Thunderclap for him, and then after 30 seconds the debuff needs to be reapplied, and then you just take a look into the threat meter, and if the warrior tank has a nice and healthy lead, then he should do it himself. then he can also calculate if he actually need it, because if he doesn't need it, maybe he doesn't want to cast it, because yeah, Demo Shot and Thunderclap particular in combination are extremely strong, and they sometimes have a great impact on the rage gain from the tank, because if the tank gets hit, he gets rage, so therefore those debuffs can have a negative impact on the threat production of the tank. So yeah, it's better if your warrior tank takes care of the second set of Demoralizing Shout and Thunderclap debuff in a boss fight. If you can't do that because the threat lead is not high enough, or basically you don't have a warrior tank, then obviously you need to keep them up the whole fight, sometimes if those debuffs are actually needed. So you always want to make sure if those debuffs are needed, because they will reduce the threat that the tank is producing, unless the tank factors in those two debuffs and rears a more aggressive set so that he can produce more threat. But a lot of the tanks actually don't. Some tanks just rear full mitigation, and if you spot this, you want to take a look on his HP bar and everything, and then on the most of the bosses you actually don't want to cast those abilities at all. But be careful with judging this, because if you misjudge this and the tank dies because of this, then you look pretty bad. The best way always is like to communicate with your tanks what debuff he wants to have on which boss, and then you go from there. Alright, let's take a look at the debuff duty from the dual wield perspective. Now it doesn't matter who you are, every time you have to apply like debuffs that don't increase your DPS, in fact they even decrease your DPS, you want to make sure that they don't interfere with your main rotation goals. So the main rotation goals for dual wield is to keep Bloodthirst and Whirlwind on cooldown, or Bloodthirst and Mortal Strike on cooldown if you are Kebab, and then to dump as much rage as possible into heroic strikes. Now with the footage in the background you can see that it's possible, but it's not easy, and if you do a mistake you are very likely to get punished. Now in the footage I'm not raid buffed, the boss is not heavily debuffed like in a raid, so the likelihood of a punishment when I make a mistake is much greater, because basically I get less rage. But still, I think even in the perfect scenario, you are likely to get punished if you do a mistake. However, if you do no mistakes at all, the DPS decrease that you suffer from by applying those two debuffs is actually not that big. Now for advice, I can give you the first advice, which is the most important one, is that you would want to pay more attention to good opportunities to cast Thunderclap and Demo Shout than to the actual debuff duration. Like if you see a perfect opportunity for a Thunderclap, do it, even if the Thunderclap lasts for another 10 seconds, because first of all they can get resisted, and second of all, those perfect opportunities, they will impact your DPS in a negative way, only by a very, very small amount. So therefore you definitely want to use those opportunities. Then the next advice that I can give you is that you want to save Blood Rage for situations where you need the 10 rage to keep Bloodthirst or Whirlwind on cooldown. And then the last advice is to not feel too rushed to get back to Berserker stance. Like if you need to cast the Bloodthirst out of your battle stance, it's not the end of the world. It's way better than to delaying your Bloodthirst just for the sake of swapping back to Berserker stance. Now if you don't have improved Berserker stance because you play like a sword spec dual wield Fury, or you play maybe a Kebab, then you want to use all the overpowers that you can get while you are in battle stance. Alright, let's take a look at this from the slam spec perspective. Well, on the slam spec we have the same most important rule than we have on the dual wield. We want to pay more attention to good opportunities than to the debuff duration. But even if you try to find good opportunities, playing this out like the whole rotation thing without crippling the main goals of the slam spec rotation is simply impossible. And therefore you just want to be extremely adaptive and you want to go with the flow. So if you get a lot of rage, for example, in battle stance, then you just want to stay there until you have spent all that rage. You can use heroic strike tricks on far lower rage level, you can use hamstrings, and you can use slam spam to get rid of rage. and if you get overpowered procs back to back, well, then it's actually a DPS increase to stay in battle stance, so yeah, don't be afraid to do that. Now, most of you guys know that the slam rotation is already pretty hard to play, but if you actually want to do it perfectly with keeping up Thunderclap and Demo Shout, it gets like, the difficulty level gets like ×3. So yeah, it's absolutely ridiculously hard, but as always, but luckily the PTR right now is still open for some reason, so you have basically endless time to practice if you want to. Now, you really want to avoid the duty of casting Thunderclap and Demoralizing Shout. You only want to take one of those. So I hopefully you have like 2 warriors in your group that is like, well, 2 DPS, or maybe you have even a tank, then you only need to apply the first setup of debuffs. But if you have a dual wielder, I would recommend you as a slam spec take the role of Thunderclap, and the dual wielder takes the role of Demo Shout. Now, Demo Shout is less of a DPS decrease for both specs, like Fury suffers almost no DPS decrease from Demo Shout, and you as Arms suffers a little bit more from Demo Shout, but not as much as, like, for example, Thunderclap. However, because of the dual wielder takes almost 0 DPS decrease from the Demo Shout, I would let him do it. And on the other hand, if you get a little bit lucky in battle stance, like I said, then battle stance can actually be a DPS increase for you as an Arms. So I would recommend you as a slam specker take the Thunderclap approach, and yeah, the dual wielder simply uses Demoralizing Shout. Now, it's very hard for me to explain all the things that you can do, and from the slam spec perspective, it's just too many little nuances, and therefore if you have a specific question, I recommend you ask me on Discord, and if you need further help we can do like a screen share or anything. And yeah, I think that's it for this video. I hope you learned something, I'm sure you did, and until the next one, stay tuned and take care.